This is the Sound of the Hound.
Welcome to the Sound of the Hound, a podcast about the early days of recorded sound. And in this series, we look at the technology, the characters, and the stories behind the invention of recorded music over 120 years ago. I'm James Hall, I'm a music journalist and author.
And I'm Dave Holley, and I'm a long-time music industry exec. I used to run Abbey Road Studios, and I'm now a trustee of the EMI Archive Trust.
So why is this podcast called The Sound of the Hound? Because we're doing it with the help of the EMI Archive Trust, which is a vast music and technology archive based in Hayes.
The EMI Trust celebrates the history of recorded sound and the work of the famous EMI group of companies, which include HMV, his master's voice.
Which is why we've named the podcast The Sound of the Hound after Nipper, the dog in the famous HMV logo.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Sound of the Hound podcast. I'm Dave Holley.
I'm James Hall.
And today we are with our hero, one of our heroes, Fred Gaisberg, and his brother Will, who are out trying to record new stars for the nascent gramophone company. And we are with them in spring 1902.
Early spring 1902.
In Milan. Why are we there?
Why are we there? The big beast. Enrico Caruso, a huge name in opera in Italy, is someone they are desperate to record, believing he could provide the breakthrough. Because the industry hadn't really taken off at this point.
Yeah, he's already well known in Italy.
He's a megastar over there, isn't he?
He's a megastar in Italy. He's already made a splash and a dash across Europe. And as of, I think, Gaisberg, Will and Fred go over there in March 2002. They have a deadline to try and get him to record. They have no agreement to get him to record, but there is a deadline because in London...
In May that year, he's coming over to play in Covent Garden.
He's signed for his first concerts.
And they want to get the discs pressed and on the market by 14th of May, where he starts at Covent Garden, so that people can buy it.
Because there'll be a huge splash. It'd be in the was the Evening Standard going then, but all the London papers would be talking about this new star.
Yeah.
The well-to-do music people would be going to see him, and this would be a fantastic opportunity for all this publicity to drive sales.
It's getting your new album out in time for Glastonbury when you headline it, isn't it?
It's a 360.
It's a 360.
It's tying live and recordings together. Almost certainly for the first time ever. There's a bit of a negotiation then with Caruso's people.
They get a deal, don't they?
They do.
They negotiate with a guy called Maestro Cotone, who I suspect is one of Caruso's agents or hangers-on, with a proposal. Caruso will sing 10 songs for £100, all to be recorded in one afternoon. Now, Fred says in his diary, to us in those days, these were staggering terms, given that the record industry hadn't really taken off. Now, I went online, I wanted to know how much £100 was back then. And the Bank of England have got this incredible thing called an inflation calculator. So you put the year in and the figure, and it tells you what that is in today's money. So 100 quid then was £12,074 today, which doesn't sound too much, does it?
For a morning's work.
Yeah, for 10 songs. So that's 1,200 quid a song.
10 songs, 2.5 minutes a song.
Yeah. I mean, is that a lot, or is
Superstar
rates?
Yeah. It's a bit like those supermodels. You know, in the 80s, you used to say,
yes,
I don't get out of bed for less than 10,000.
Exactly.
And so I guess in that terms, it probably was quite a lot of money.
I suppose it was.
And I guess from an industry which didn't have a lot of sales coming in at the other end, there wasn't a huge market for this yet.
Yeah.
So I suppose it was a huge amount of money in those terms.
And this is where this interesting part of the story. So Fred, with this offer, he telegraphs London, doesn't he? And says, this is the deal. Caruso will sing for £100 for 10 songs. And he gets a reply from his bosses in London, doesn't he?
It's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 words. Fee exorbitant, forbid you to record.
Which is pretty black and white, isn't it? Fred said he felt humiliated and hopeless to argue, and he thought they don't understand what we've got here. We have to do this.
Fred's on the ground.
He's on the ground.
The idiots are back in London.
In London, the bean counters.
Yeah,
the bean counters. And so what does Fred do? He says, all right, let's do it. And he pays him out of his own pocket.
Yeah, so he guarantees it himself and goes ahead. It's a heroic...
It's a heroic rebellion,
yes.
isn't it?
And actually, I have a theory that this is where the modern recording industry properly begins. You've got a superstar... You've got a
rebellious A&R man, exactly.
You're sticking one in the eye of the man back at the record industry.
Yeah, this
and
is
you're
it.
Going to create some art.
All with big handlebar moustaches and
absolutely.
Oiled hair.
And it turns out to be quite successful.
Oh, yes.
It? Because Fred does mention a number somewhere about how much profit.
Yes, now this is quite fun. So they did their 10 recordings, more of which in a minute, actually, because there's some quite good descriptions. They did press them up in time for May the 14th. And Fred believes that these records made a profit of £15,000, which back in those days...
You're going to do the conversion.
Was a whopping, ready? 1.8 million.
Yeah,
which is pretty good.
You kind of think nowadays, it's tens of millions. From a successful recording, but how many people had a record player in 1902?
Exactly.
How many people were actually buying records?
Yeah.
It's phenomenal.
It's phenomenal. That's return of investment on I don't know what, many thousands of times, isn't it?
150 times.
Not bad. So we're back. It's April 11th. The recordings took place.
Yeah, he arrives towards the end of the morning, dressed. This is the quote from Fred: "Dressed like a dandy, twirling a cane," which I just think it's lovely.
It's lovely, isn't it?
But interesting enough, we were talking about his entourage. So Fred says this: we barred from the room his escort of braves, which must be Italian for mates,
Yeah.
With the exception of his accompanist, Maestro Catoni.
So the guy they negotiated with, it was his.
We thought Fred maybe had accompanied.
Yes, the pianist.
So it's Mattoni who he negotiated the rate with. And this is what's lovely. Caruso wanted to get the job over quickly, as he was anxious to earn that £100 and have his lunch.
Priorities.
But he forgot all about this when he started on the job.
And so the first record, they're in a hotel, aren't they? They're in a hotel in Milan that they've had. It's called Studenti Udite, from Germania. And Fred was so excited when he recorded this, that he wrote the Matrix number that he'd already used, big mistake, on the Pinto recording on the master for this one. He was obviously just all of a quiver. This is a big recording. This is
a big star, possibly the biggest star he's recorded.
A curtain divided the room, behind which we erected the recording apparatus and laid out the wax discs ready for receiving the sound. On the other side, so with Caruso, was an upright piano set up high on packing cases.
That's interesting, because when we looked at pictures of the gramophone recording studio in Maiden Lane, which is not purpose-built, but it was fitted out as a permanent.
Yes.
There's actually, the pianos are raised on a wooden instrument.
On wheels.
But this is them on tour. These are the guys on tour, so they're using the packing cases that the recording equipment come, and then put the piano on top
of that. Yeah. Now, the piano had its sounding board facing a bell-shaped metal horn suspended 5 feet from the floor. The items, so the songs, were all about 2.5 minutes to 3 minutes long. This is Fred's
10 songs.
10 songs, one after the other. And it's quite a strain on the voice. 10, that's 30 minutes of singing.
Particularly when lunch is
waiting.
Is waiting.
His pasta's getting cold. And the items were about 3 minutes long. And after one after the other, as fast as we could, this is Fred, we put the waxes on the machine, and Caruso poured the fresh gold of that beautiful voice.
I love.
Isn't that a lovely description? He then sang Questo e Quello from Rigoletto. Now, we have that here. Should we listen to it?
The wonders of modern science.
The wonders of modern science.
We should be able to play.
So this is Caruso singing Questo e Quello, accompanied by not Fred Gaisberg as we thought, but Maestro Catone on the piano. What a voice, how powerful. And that is singing without electricity down a horn in a Milan hotel room.
This time we're talking about one of the most interesting characters that our friend Fred Gaisberg gets to record in his early years, in fact in his life. It's a chap called, and we've been trying to work out how best to pronounce his name. I think it might be Alessandro either Moreschi. Moreschi. So Moreschi probably sounds better. And he's very interesting. Why?
He's a castrato, and we think he's the only castrato ever to be recorded. He was certainly the first, because castratos were banned around this time.
Okay, can I just put in a health warning here? If you hear a thud, that is me passing out. I'm very queasy. Have you ever seen that film 127 Hours?
No.
Where the guy gets his arm trapped.
Yes.
I passed out watching it. I got the yellow mist, and in front of my then 16-year-old son and wife, fainted, and it's just anything a little bit graphic.
Oh dear, Dave.
So
this is far more disturbing than that.
Will you explain what a castrato is?
Okay, so it's a man without testicles. I mean, let's not beat about the bush here. It's
Who can sing a bit?
Who can sing a bit? A little bit of history here. In the Middle Ages, the church upheld St. Paul's injunction that women keep their silence in churches. Therefore, all the female parts in a choir were sung either by boys, men with high voices, or castrated men. And
so he's very woke, Paul, isn't he?
The Sistine Chapel Choir in particular had a number of castratos, and there could be money in it. So families would often castrate their children to put them into a choir. Now, I have a description here of how it's done. Again,
if you're
brace yourself, Dave.
If you're slightly faint-hearted, you may just want to turn the sound down for the next 30 seconds.
Okay, I'm going to read a paragraph here. If medical assistance could not be afforded, the child's mother usually conducted the operation herself. The testicles were removed by putting the patient into a bath of warm water to soften and supple the parts and make them more tractable. Then the jugular veins were pressed, making the party so stupid and insensible that he fell into a kind of apoplexy. The knife was warmed before the cut was made, and opium was sometimes administered to calm the victim, despite the fact that this palliative was more likely to kill the child. So that's Alessandro Moreschi. And it's kind of, it's incredibly impressive. It's quite kind of overwrought, isn't it? And
it's
those high notes,
sweet.
Yes,
but something
a little bit
rich.
Yes, and a little
too rich, maybe.
Sort of cloying and, not very beautiful, is it? It's sort of, it's more kind of impressive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it is sort of ghostly and odd, and I can't get the image
so
of,
high,
so
ridiculously high.
But I can't get the image of those poor little boys in their baths, being heated up, ready to be.
So they decide to head home, but they go via Warsaw, don't they?
I think probably the most brilliant bit of the trip actually happens in Warsaw.
Well, it's the most unfortunate bit of the trip.
Gobsmacking. And Fred records these in his memoirs later. So he's actually, one interesting thing he says about Polish artists, they were suspicious of us and made us pay in advance before they sang. The artists in Russia were much more trusting. But anyway, they have a week there. They've got a lot of good records.
And he's recorded a prima donna called Krushenski.
Yeah.
Who actually agreed to go to the makeshift studio in there that they set up in their hotel room, which is quite an important. They'd set up this studio with all the acid in their hotel room,
big horns and all of that rubbish. Anyway, they're going home the following day.
We're on the eve of the 20th of March, 1900.
And on Friday night, they decide to go to bed. They're probably absolutely cream-crackered. Do you want to read out that next bit?
So they're lying in bed in a hotel in Warsaw with this makeshift studio at their feet, at the foot of their bed probably. At about 2 a.m, Fred says, we were awakened by terrible battering on the door. The porter and 3 or 4 others wanted to know what terrible happenings were going on. The room below us was dripping with what might be blood or something deadly and was falling on the face of the sleeping occupant. We went into our lab/recording studio.
I.e. other hotel room.
Yeah. And to our dismay, found a bucket filled with old acid had sprung a leak and the floor was flooded. This is extraordinary. The bright red fluid dripped through the ceiling onto the sleeping guest. When his body began to smart, he roused the hotel. Imagine lying in bed and acid is dripping from the ceiling onto your head.
I've got a hole in my head.
How did that happen? In my head. We had the disagreeable task of sopping it up in our nightshirts. Come on, poor them. What about the poor person who's covered in it? And expecting the manager up at any moment to pitch us out, bag and luggage. Yes,
brilliant.
It actually, serious point. It shows the dangers that they put both themselves and others into in the process of recording, didn't it?
People sort of rail against or belittle health and safety rules, but leaving a bucket of acid in a roof
just sitting there
above somebody's bed isn't. There should be rules against that.
There should
be.
There
probably are these days.
Anyway, they were billed for it the following Monday. It was a 19 ruble charge.
Well, that's the
14 rubles for room repairs.
14 rubles for room repairs.
Doesn't sound.
There's no mention of the poor guy who's been doused in acid.
This is the Sound of the Hound.
Welcome to the Sound of the Hound.